Political Science here at Southwest Minnesota State University. Welcome to this Candidates Forum, which comes to you from the SMSU Conference Center. A special welcome to those of you joining us on KMHL AM 1400 and watching on Marshall Studio One. In 1992, the Political Science Association, a student club here at SMSU, began to host candidate debates. The Marshall Area Chamber of Commerce has been a co-sponsor since 1998. Also, both groups wish to thank the SMSU Faculty Association for providing tonight's hospitality, and at any time during the program, you're welcome to go over and refresh and reload. So thank you, Faculty Association, for that. This partnership is committed to informing the voters of our region as they prepare to choose their next state legislators on November 8th. Our thanks to KMHL, Marshall Studio One, and SMSU Media for making possible tonight's broadcast coverage. And now, let's meet tonight's moderators. Brad Gruhot is president of the Marshall Area Chamber of Commerce, and he will moderate our first session. Maria Kingsbury will moderate the second panel. She is professor of library and president of the SMSU Faculty Association. We begin with Mr. Gruhot.
Good evening, everyone. Our first set of candidates are running for state representative in District 15A. We'll have a series of questions from the audience and our media panel, and we'll finish with a closing statement of 2 minutes each. Let's meet our panel. Mike Lamb is the editor for the Marshall Independent, and Aaron Ziemer is the sales manager for KMHL Marshall Radio. If you have a question for the candidates, please take a card from one of the ushers from the Political Science Association, and they are right here. They will gather your questions and deliver them to our panelists, who will select questions of general interest and relevance to this election. And now let's meet the candidates for House District 15A. In alphabetical order, they are Republican candidate Chris Wyszynski, who lives near Ghent, and Keith Van Overbeck, candidate of the Democratic Farmer Labor County, who lives in Marshall. Now it's time to begin with the questions. Candidates, you'll have up to 90 seconds for each response. Though you can use less time if you wish, we'll rotate in order in which you respond. Please be alert for our timekeeper, Hua Shi Yang, which she is right here in the first row. She will signal when you have 30 seconds left, then 10 seconds remaining. Audience, please refrain from audible expressions or approval or disapproval so we can devote as much time to our candidates. Panelists, your first questions, please.
The political division in St. Paul stopped quite a few things from getting done during the last legislative session. What will you do to help accomplish those things?
Representative Swedzinski, your response.
Well, that's a good question. You know, there's a lot of things that weren't necessarily going to be good, which it depends on which side of the aisle you're on, that are good to stop. But there are other things that are good to hopefully move forward. And, you know, one of the chief things that I'm looking to move forward that failed to happen last session just because it didn't happen was the Social Security tax. That's one of the first things that I would like to see out of the gate. I think setting an early example of getting things done is going to be important. So I'm going to be advocating with leadership and hopefully a new governor to move something like that forward in within the first couple of weeks to move some issues like that and a lot of permit reform, potential, a bill that would maybe do some infrastructure just right away. It's possible we could do that. But tax reform, I think, and lessening cost of energy. Those would be things that I would advocate to do right away. I think a lot of folks would agree that Social Security tax was a very popular thing to do. A lot of folks were looking at that, especially folks that are older on Social Security. And I think I'd like to really move some of those bipartisan things that both Republicans and Democrats have both said that they would support and move them quickly right away in session.
Mr. Van Overbeck.
Well, it's regrettable the way the last session ended. You know, the GOP gubernatorial candidate basically told his people to, take their marbles and go home. And really what had been worked out up to that point had a lot of good material in there. And the thing is that the Senate approved a lot of bills. And then my opponent in the House would vote against these. Sadly, these bills were, a fraction of what the House had proposed. So he's right. There's differences of emphasis between the two parties. But I agree. One thing that we could do right off the bat, I think, is renters credits, and that we can make sure that that's put on the income tax form so that people with lesser means don't overlook that credit. I think the Social Security situation needs to be looked at a little bit closer. It needs to be means tested to a degree.
Panelists, next question.
Would you support the city of Marshall in getting authorization to extend the 0.5% sales tax locally for an aquatic center?
Mr. Van Overbeck.
I would support that. I live here in Marshall, so would be one of the people that would be paying that. I mean, when we talk about fractions of percentages, it's not egregious. I think that we have to be realistic. We can't build the Taj Mahal all the time, but we do need an upgrade on our aquatic center. There's no question about that. We're losing a lot of money. It's not just the water that we're losing out of the pool. We're repairing and trying to keep a facility going that's really not up to par. So yes, I would support that.
Representative Swedzinski.
Yes, thank you. I did carry the bill for that, and it was moving forward. There is a part of the conversation that we did have that wasn't fleshed out with some of my concerns that I did have with it when it came to a revenue sharing. There's other parts of the state, the city of Rochester does do revenue sharing with the cities around it because they are essentially, they pay too. And so folks that come to Marshall and spend money. And so I was moving forward some proposals and some ideas to help some of those small cities and towns that don't nearly have that much. And my goal is to still have that conversation. Because it didn't get done this last session because of the tax bill, I'd like to have continue those conversations. And we have been doing that with a lot of the cities, talking to city council members, a lot of the work that wasn't able to get done before when we first proposed the idea. We're fleshing those things out and hopefully can consume that conversation so that the city of Marshall can advance their project, but potentially have some positive impacts on cities that are around it as well.
Okay.
School test scores have dropped over the last couple of years in Minnesota. How would you propose the state help to solve that problem?
Representative Swedzinski.
Certainly. I think that's obviously part of that was the COVID response and having kids, office from home and do a lot of that. That affected generally most students that you can tell, if you're not spending day in, day out, face-to-face with an educator, whether you're a homeschooler, a private schooler, or a public schooler, it does have an effect on your ability to retain information. And, I think, in general, how do you move test scores up? One of the biggest issues that we've had is an achievement gap. So when you look at cities in the metro versus cities here in rural Minnesota, look at Minneapolis. They spend 3 times what we spend here in Minneapolis than what we spend here in Marshall in Southwest Minnesota, and yet they have abysmal results. And so is it spending that's the problem, or is it opportunity? And I think what we need to do is look uniquely. There's children, we can't have a one-size-fits-all education system. A lot of kids learn differently. They may have reading difficulty. They may have a tough time reading their textbook. And so how do we advance education that is more catered to the child, not necessarily the firstborn child, but maybe the thirdborn child? And I think giving parents choice is a big part of that. And competition is good.
Mr. Van Overbeck.
I guess the idea of choice sounds good on the face of it, but really the problem is that education system needs adequate funding. It's variable from district to district. It needs to be more generally equalized. The state does need to continue to invest in education. I mean, that's our future. I mean, our human capital is what's going to propel this state forward and keep us at the forefront of innovation. So anytime we don't spend money on education, we're more apt to have to pick up the tab and pay somewhere else later down the line. So we need more activities in some of these neighborhoods. We got to realize that there's demographic differences, there's language differences, there's a lot of factors that would help to explain why there's differing outcomes. And primarily, we really do need to get to the point where everyone in the state believes that they can succeed, that they will have opportunity. I think we need to innovate more. The pandemic, we need more broadband, has shown that we can utilize that to a much greater extent also.
We've received a number of questions dealing with the abortion issue, so I thought maybe, clear that up. What's your stance on abortion as far as the legislature goes?
Let's see. Keith Van Overbeck, Mr. Van Overbeck.
The Supreme Court, as we all know, has weighed in heavily on the abortion issue. And, they pushed it back to the states for the most part. And we've seen the reaction in different states. The thing is, this is an issue of individual rights. We cannot continue to think that, every potential child, no matter what the outcome might be, that the woman has to carry this particular pregnancy to term. I mean, there's ectopic pregnancies, there's rape, incest, there's all kinds of things where we're delving mightily into an individual's rights. And I find it kind of difficult to understand why a party that says that they're for freedom of all types, when it comes to your personal rights, are going to tread rather heavily. And I think that the other party's governor candidate, if he becomes our governor, we're going to have a real hectic, difficult, tough situation in our state. And it doesn't need to be that way. Send it back to states, but then don't meddle beyond that.
Representative Swazinski.
Thank you. Good question. I'm 100% pro-life, endorsed by MCCL. My views are pretty straightforward on the issue. I do believe in individual rights. The difference is I believe the individual is also the person within the womb. And so just as you and I would choose life, I believe that person would want to choose that. It may not have a voice at the time, but my guess, if you were to ask that person in eternity, which I believe that we will, my guess is they would make that pretty vocal. As far as the only thing Democrats are talking about as an issue when it comes to their governor candidate, I mean, could you imagine spending $5 million only talking about abortion? And why are you talking about that? You're talking about it because you failed the state of Minnesota, Governor Walz. You allowed Minneapolis to burn. You were in charge, and you blamed a judge who had nothing to do with it, that he allowed $250 million, the largest scam in the state of Minnesota, under his watch to continue, and blames it on the judge. And the judge is like, I had nothing to do with it, son. You did it. Don't elect that man again. Because it's more than about the future of our state.
Okay, next question.
What is your position on the California emission standards? Should Minnesota be following California's lead on those?
Representative Swazinski.
No.
Oh, we have the mic is out.
I would just say no. I'm a loud no. So I would say no, just because, the foundational issue, we say, Keith and I both agree that, states have rights. And I do not want to turn our state's rights over to bureaucrats in California. And I would understand if the legislature and the governor signed into law a bill that said, hey, I want to follow California down a rabbit hole. I want to send our economy into abysmal failure. But it didn't. It was done by rule. It was done by rulemaking through elected bureaucracy. If that's the democracy people in this room want to protect by having rulemakers and unelected bureaucrats shove California bureaucratic rules down our throat and laws, by all means. But no, I do not support California, our rules here in Minnesota done by.
Mr. Van Overbeck, that mic should work. Yeah.
Okay. I think the governor is amenable to taking another look at this situation. We have about a year to go before the present situation expires. And there's a way to work toward green energy, renewables, build a bridge toward the future. But also, we need to start investing in charging stations and that. If we don't do it, the South Koreans will do it, or the Chinese will do it, or any other of our competitors around the world will develop the electric car market. It's up and it's gaining speed. And even the automakers are trending in that direction. So we don't have to follow California on every detail of this situation, but in general, we have to agree that things are going on with our climate. We are, burning fossil fuels that will not last forever. They will become increasingly expensive. So this technology is developing. People around the world are bright. They spend money on educating their people. So if we want to get left behind, if we want to be increasingly in the dust of our competition around the world, well, then we can blame everything on California and we can, exaggerate things, but that's not going to solve a thing.
Okay, next question.
The COVID panic brought on a lot of extreme measures that turned out to be useless and even harmful. What do you feel was the worst example of that? And what should be done now to prevent the destructive overreach when the next crisis occurs?
Mr. Van Overbeck.
I'm not certain that I agree with the premise of the question. It's assuming that everything that our leaders did and attempted to do somehow backfired, was useless, needless, and so on. But there's 3 million people in this country that you wouldn't be able to tell that to anymore because they're not amongst us anymore. We needed to do things. The real problem was both nationally and at a state level, the whole situation became politicized. And people, stopped using their common sense. My mother's 94 years old. She says in the 50s, as soon as the polio vaccine came out, people virtually ran, if they hadn't already gotten polio and were crippled, to get the vaccine for them and for their children. Since when did we think that there's some kind of a battle between science and the Almighty? I mean, these people like Dr. Osterholm are experts in their field. They're not making things up. People got sick. People were impacted. People died. I think the politicization by politicians is what spoiled the milk.
Representative.
Well, I think regardless of what your thoughts are on vaccines, what is the power of government and what is its role during a pandemic? I think one of the first things that we would look at, and I would like to see addressed when it comes to curbing executive power in this particular area, is allowing big box stores to stay open and your Main Street businesses to be closed down. If you were one of those downtown businesses who were forced to close your doors because maybe you didn't sell enough candy or other food items, you had to close your doors so that Walmart and the big box stores could stay open. There's a lot of frustration there. And, allowing individual business owners and just individuals to make the best choice for themselves. Looking back, what could we have done different? We probably could have done a lot of different things. But, there was a lot of angst early on from a legislative standpoint, from a governor standpoint, on what to do and how to do it. regardless of what you think of Trump, one of the things that he did that was exceptionally good was the reaction and the kickstarting of the vaccine and the development of that. Without his abilities as a businessman, regardless of what you say about him, that was probably one of his better things that he did when it came to the development of that. So it is what it is. So.
Next question. Oh, you need a mic too.
Much has been made about public safety in Minnesota, including gun violence. What would you support as a way to make Minnesota more safe?
Well, if you're caught doing a crime with a gun, which most of the carjackings that are going down in Minneapolis right now are with a gun, I would say it's an automatic no bail, automatic felony, automatic 10 years in jail. If you want to seriously it's gang-related violence is 9 times out of 10 one of the biggest issues that we deal with. I talking to Minneapolis cops just yesterday, and they said it's 13 to 17-year-olds doing a vast majority of the carjackings with a gun in Minneapolis. And they don't just steal the car with a gun to go for a joyride. They go and they steal a car and they do more crimes with it. They carjack another car. They pick up people. They sideswipe folks. They're driving crazy. They put TikTok videos up while they're driving. Instead of having a revolving door where these kids aren't being held accountable, aren't being held. They said literally you could run from a cop, high speed, cause an accident, and the prosecutors aren't going to hold you for more than 3 hours and you're back on the street. That's not how you solve a crime problem. It's pretty easy. It's getting new prosecutors that are going to do their job. They're going to enforce gun laws that are currently on the books and not just poo-poo them. Instead of asking for more, it's saying, well, what we need is a gun ban. Well, how about we just enforce the ones we have and put people in jail that are committing crimes today with guns? That might help.
Mr. Van Overbeck.
I'm going to agree to a significant extent with you, Chris, on this subject. I'm troubled, too, when you hear 12, 14-year-old kids carjacking and that. I guess my problem with your solution of 10 years in jail, that could apply to those that are, 18 and older and that. But you have to figure out a way to change these communities. And I agree, it's mostly gang-related. So you really have to put the gangs out of business. And obviously these young kids, that's a rite of passage. That's the way they join the gang. You've got to take the profit and the money out of it. It's drug-related. You've got to convince young people that drugs are not an answer in their lives, not making their lives better. And yes, you need to be very tough on the criminals that are bringing in the drugs, that are selling the drugs, that are profiting from the drugs. But you have to have some compassion for these young people come up in these broken homes, broken communities, and figure out another way to transition them to more positive lives. And part of that is solving some of the school problems and the community problems and the activity problems.
Do you feel elections are secure? What needs to be changed? If not, how do we make sure every vote counts?
For the most part, Minnesota is in a very privileged position. I think we have virtually no need to be concerned as long as Secretary of State Simon is on the job and his predecessors and all that's been done in the history of Minnesota. The pandemic of 2020, that election, we had more than ordinary amounts of mail-in ballots and so on. But that was a one-time. We're back to pretty much normal now. There's not a lot of election fraud going on. I mean, it's virtually nil. It's been proven that really doesn't exist to a statistical degree at all to cause any concern. Now, other states and what I see happening in this whole situation, yes, I'd be concerned if I was in Arizona, whether or not all the votes were going to be cast, especially myself as a Democrat. I'd be really concerned. But I like Minnesota. and I plan on staying here, and I've already voted. So I really don't have ongoing concerns about election fraud in our state. We need to just avoid it at the national level, and I know a good way to do that, but I have to be kind.
Representative?
I think, that election integrity is probably one of the biggest things folks have talked about in the last few years. I think, some of the things we can look at other states that have done that at least give people a piece. Oh, is that better? Sorry about that. I'm used to being a loudmouth, so I'm a little scared to do that. But, I think, one of the ways that we could probably put people at peace that are concerned about election integrity is voter ID. I think that's one of those, fundamental things that you're going in with an ID, you understand who you are, you say you are, you're only going to vote once. And regardless of if you feel there's fraud, depends on who wins, right? I mean, if you've won, there is no voter fraud. If you've lost, there is voter fraud. Well, what are the things that we can do that whether you're a Republican or Democrat can agree on that would give people peace of mind? I think, voter ID would be one of those things that, we all mostly have IDs. Let's just make sure that that's part of the process. And I think that would put a lot of people at ease. And I think it doesn't hurt to have a little insurance and making sure that our election is up to go. So,
Great.
the next one.
Perfect. Thank you, candidates. Now it's time for closing statements, which will be given in reverse sequence of the opening. So, Mr. Van Overbeck, your 2-minute closing statement, please.
For my closing, I guess I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Keith Van Overbeck. I was born in Tracy, Minnesota in 1953, so that's why my hair looks this way. I wish someone younger would have stepped forward to run. Chris likes loyal opposition. He's not afraid of that. But that didn't happen. This is a crucial election leading up to the 2024 national election. We can see what's going on in this country and how we're shredding the fabric that connects us to each other. We need to realize that there's a function for government. Government has been bad-mouthed ever since a B-grade actor left the Screen Actors Guild, and changed parties. He was a Democrat until he started fingering communists. But we know the story. That's something from California that's come into the national political realm that we should be concerned about. It's supposed to be our government. I mean, that's why we have elections, and people need to be involved. And if I end up in St. Paul, I won't have all the answers. I've got a lot of good friends out here. Hopefully I'll make more friends. I'll listen to people. There's ideas that need to be put forward. We had opportunities, to do things for this part of the state, and then the legislature decided, on someone's behest to shut down and get nothing done. We can't continue to do that. I don't think compromise is a dirty word. I think it's the same at the federal level. The parties need to come toward each other and solve the people's problems. Our government in this country and state needs to work, or we'll become a third world country.
Representative.
Again, Chris Wazenski, it's an honor to serve Southwest Minnesota in the Minnesota legislature. I'm asking for your vote this November, or now if you want to go in. Not right now, but during regular business hours at the courthouse. But I would encourage you all to vote, whether you're Republican or Democrat. Our elections are exceptionally important. And get out and vote. Whether you vote for Democrat, Republican, or an independent, that's one of our main civic duties. There's a lot of work to do, and that's why I'm running for re-election. Whether it be a solid tax bill, whether it be easing the burdens of inflation by cutting the cost of energy in the state of Minnesota. We tax energy, and that gets passed on to consumers. So if you want your energy bills to go down, we need to get rid of the taxes that we have on the energy that runs through our lines, or the gas that goes through our furnace. We need to find unique ways to, one, be self-sufficient, but two, be responsible with the dollars. Hold our leaders responsible when they allow $250 million to slip through our fingers to their political friends. That's an okay thing, even if we're in the same party. That's okay. And I want to represent Southwest Minnesota on agricultural issues and standing up against bureaucrats in the MPCA that make it very difficult to build business here in Minnesota. there's a lot of things that we compete against. We don't need to compete against ourselves. And that's why I'm running to be your next state representative for 15A, and I'd appreciate your vote. And to the students, I want to thank you for putting this on here at SMSU. I want to thank the Chamber for sponsoring the event here today. And I want to thank everyone here for taking time, and those folks listening on the radio, but also those watching out on the public access channel. Thank you, and I'd appreciate your vote. Thank you.
This concludes our session for House District 15A. We'll take a short pause as the next panelists take their places. This is the 2022 Legislative Candidates Forum, coming to you live from Southwest Minnesota State University over KMHL AM 1400 in Marshall Studio 1. I now welcome Maria Kingsbury, who will moderate our second panel. Maria.
Good evening. It's now time to hear from the candidates for Minnesota Senate District 15. We'll begin with questions from the audience and our media panelists, Mike Lamb and Aaron Ziemer, and we'll finish with closing statements of 2 minutes each. Audience, if you have fresh questions for the candidates, please take a card from one of the ushers. See them with their raised hands here. So let's meet the candidates for the 15th Senate District. They are Democratic Farmer Labor candidate, Dr. Anita Gall, who lives in Marshall, and Republican candidate, Gary Dames, who lives near Redwood Falls. And now, questions for the candidates. Our timekeeper will signal when you have 30 seconds left, and then 10 seconds. The first answer will come from Senator Dames.
What work will you do within your party to make sure our $9 billion surplus doesn't go completely unspent?
Well, good evening, folks. Appreciate your being here. That's a very good question. I think that one of the things we'll be looking at, certainly next year is a budget year. And so as far as I'm concerned, that $9 billion, it's going to actually be a little more than that, will be put into the mix of the money just like it would be on a normal budget year. And we'll have to decide, certainly we need some tax relief when you have last year's a $13.7 billion surplus. And you have surpluses for as many years as we did in a row. It says that we're overtaxing our constituents. So we need some tax relief, and part of that tax relief would certainly come under the relieving the Social Security from the state income tax. That's one piece of it. There are several other pieces that were in the tax bill last year that we took a look at. And also, we're going to be refunding and redoing the budget for the next biennium. In that part of it, we would be taking a look at how much money we're going to spend in what different areas. One of the things that I think we certainly want to make sure that we do is that we spend the money according to need and not according to just some formula that everybody gets an additional amount of dollars. That's what I would be looking at with the surplus that there will be.
Thank you, Dr. Gall.
As I understand it, in this last legislative session, there was a deal on the table to spend this $9 billion surplus. A third of it was going to go to tax relief, a third of it was going to go to spending, and a third of it was going to go to reserves. This seems like a pretty sensible plan to me. This is tax relief that was sitting on the table, and the Senate Republicans walked away from this deal. So I say in the next legislative session, let's take up that deal again. This seems like a pretty sensible way to go forward. Let's take a third, put it in reserves. Let's take a third, put it in to tax relief, and let's put a third into spending. So I say let's reintroduce that bill, and let's try this again next year.
Thank you.
What ideas do you have to help address the partisan divide at the state legislature?
Dr. Gall.
One of the reasons that I jumped into this race is because I am frustrated. I think a lot of Minnesotans are frustrated. I'm so frustrated I decided to run for office and do something about it. I'm frustrated at how partisan everything is, how we can't even get $9 billion surplus taken care of because we're so divided. So my idea, and the thing that I have said throughout this campaign, is I am a connector. I am a person who grew up on her family's farm, who went away to live in the big city, and came back here to live and raise my family. I understand both worlds. I understand both urban and rural mindsets, and I can bridge that divide. I will tell you that for most of my life, I voted Republican. I grew up in a very Republican household, but I am now a Democrat. But I understand the worldview of both sides. I understand what motivates people. I can bridge the Democrat-Republican divide. I am a connector who can work to bridge the divide between these parties and get something done, for crying out loud.
Well, I think a couple of things. We have to realize that about 95% of all of the bills that are passed are passed with bipartisan votes. When we get to the budget, that's where the biggest concern comes about, is in the budgeting area. And you know, there's a certain point in time when you're sitting on $13.7 billion and you have half of or part of the Senate and part of the House that all they want to do is spend it. They don't care what they spend it on, it's got to be spent. And that's where you have to draw the line. We could have spent $13.7 billion last year. Some of you folks might have been very happy. Some of you folks would have been very unhappy. So when you're in the legislative body, you might think that you can connect all the dots and make everything work, and maybe you can, maybe you can't. But I can say this, you have to do what's best for the state. And sometimes saying no, like in the last budget bill, the agreement was there, it was signed by the majority leader, it was signed by the Speaker of the House, and it was also signed by the governor. Another group came along and wanted a bunch of additional money. And we said no. We had an agreement, and we're going to live with that agreement. And we weren't going to keep spending additional money because somebody came in later and said, I won't vote unless you do this. Sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, and you have to say enough is enough, and we're only going to spend so much money. So we can look at it both ways depending on what side of the aisle you're on.
Thank you, Senator.
Would you support the city of Marshall getting authorization to extend the 0.5% sale tax locally for an aquatic center?
Senator Dames.
Well, thank you for the question, and the answer is that yes, I would. I did carry the bill last year. When I take a look at renewing these sales tax parts for these cities that want to do things with some of the increasing the sales tax, I look at it this way: they have to go to a vote. And if the citizens of the community vote to do it, then I'm not going to stop it at the legislative body. If the citizens in the community say, no, we do not want to do it, and they don't pass the referendum, then that takes care of it. As far as I'm concerned, our job as legislatures is to have local control, And if you locally decide that you would like to see this continued, then I'm going to support that continuation and assume that you've done your due diligence and that your voters have taken a look and decided that they think this is best for their community.
Absolutely. I've got 3 kids. We have a family pass to the Marshall pool every summer. We spend half of our summer at the pool. And hearing that the pool is leaking, like 10,000 gallons a day or something, some ridiculous number like that, that's just not sustainable. We clearly need to do something. The age of the structure is to the point where you can't really repair that anymore. So me and my family, we went to the first planning meetings. We wanted to have our voice, what kind of new aquatic center do we want to see in Marshall? We were all excited. Yeah, and then the last legislative session, and that went nowhere. So yes, I would be in favor of this, and I hope that can move forward next legislative session.
Thank you.
Do you feel that Minnesota has a gun problem, a crime problem, or both? And if so, what would you do? What would you propose to solve them?
Dr. Gall.
Sometimes I think it's hard to separate which is the actual problem, but I think however you look at it, the crime problem is exacerbated by the number of guns that we have on our streets and in our communities. I think gun violence is a serious problem, not only in our state, but in our nation. I remember when my little 6-year-old son came home from kindergarten, and my 6-year-old baby came home and said, "Mom, do you know what we did today? We had an active shooter drill." And he described to me what happens in an active shooter drill. And I think my heart broke a little bit inside me, because I'm like, what kind of world does my son live in where they have active shooter drills in school? They teach them how to die instead of do something about mass shootings and the number of guns that are in people's hands. And then I kind of went numb, because the number of mass shootings we hear about, it's all the time, isn't it? And then Uvalde, Texas happened. And those little kids, they had to get DNA samples from their parents to identify those little kids, because they were shot at such close range by an assault weapon. We need to do something about guns on the streets. We need to enact a universal background check. We need red flag laws, and we need to raise the minimum age at which people are allowed to buy assault weapons.
Well, we certainly have a crime problem, no question about it, and in many cases guns are used as an instrument to do that crime. We fully understand that, but I can tell you this. If we take a look, when we started in the state of Minnesota, when we started reducing the penalties, started reducing the amount of time people spend in jail, started doing more with probation and things like that, we saw our crime rates go up. Then the next level comes along, we decide we're going to defund our police, and some cities want to get rid of their police departments. We see the crime rates continually go up. Look what happened in Minneapolis. Look at the crime rates in Minneapolis. What's happened to those crime rates since 2 years ago? It's unbelievable what's going on. And the only way that's going to stop is you have to get serious about, you commit a crime, you pay the time. We have to get serious about that. And we have to get serious about what we're doing with these people committing these crimes and who we're blaming it on. And we have to fund our police departments, and we have to make sure that these people have the right things to do their job with. And instead of defunding them, let's not disgrace them. Let's make sure that that's an opportunity that young folks want to go into. Guns are an issue. Absolutely they are. But I can tell you, you can take the guns off the street. The people committing the crime will find the gun. They're out there, they'll find them in the black market. So let's start making sure that we enforce the laws that we have, put them into effect, and make sure that the people that commit the crime pay the time.
How do you view Minnesota's regulatory system? Do you believe we can have a strong economy and strong environmental protections, or do you see those as goals at odds with each other?
Senator Dames.
I think we certainly can have a strong economy and certainly in strong environmental communities. Certainly we can. We just have to make sure that we do things that work hand in hand. And too many times we have the left hand doing something and the right hand doing something else within the agencies, and we're actually doing things that we have a lot of unintended consequences that come after that for what we've done. We need to have a lot better communication within our agencies and get out of the silo spectrum that we currently have. We have an agency that's ahead to do one thing, and pretty soon there's mission creep. They're working in something else a different agency is doing. We need to make sure that we get rid of the silos, have people communicate, and we can certainly have a strong economy and still be very environmentally sound.
Well, I think I'm going to agree with Gary for much of this one. I think you can have both. I mean, you have to have good regulations in order to have a strong economy. You can't have no regulations and, poison all your water and strip mine all your forests and then expect you to have a good tourist industry. I mean, you need both. So again, within reason, we need to look carefully at the regulations that we do pass. Maybe sometimes we do need to review what we already have on the books to make sure, do these make sense? Are these appropriate for the situation at hand? But yes, I believe you actually need both in order to have a strong economy.
Thank you.
I'll follow that with, what is your position on the California emission standards? Should Minnesota be following California's lead?
Go ahead, Dr. Gall.
Now, in my door knocking around this district, this is, I will say, one of the top issues that comes up. And and a lot of people are concerned, both Democrats and Republicans are concerned about this clean car mandate. Look, we all know we have to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels. Our dependence on them puts us in a very tricky situation. A war in Ukraine makes the price of oil go up. OPEC announced last week they're going to decrease output and raise the price of oil. We are at the mercy of other countries when we don't wean ourselves off of fossil fuels. And instead of looking at this as this situation like, oh, we can never do this, oh, we can't accomplish this, all this, we can't do this, why don't we turn that around and look at this as a great opportunity? This is an opportunity to start us down the path to wean us from fossil fuels. This is an opportunity for us to bring new industry, not only into our state, but in our country. I was just reading articles how new factories are being started to start manufacturing electric car batteries. This is an opportunity for the United States to once again take a lead in the auto industry. And instead of sitting around, oh, this isn't going to work, let's look at it as an opportunity. Now, are there real concerns about the timeline and the implementation of this? Sure there are. But you know what? As a DFL senator from Greater Minnesota, I think I could have some pull with the Walz administration and say, you know what, Governor Walz, I think you and my constituents need to sit down, talk about how we're going to implement this, and then move forward from there.
Well, the California clean car emission program has certainly been a debacle on the part of our governor. And this should have been brought to the legislators. The legislators should have had input on this instead of he saying, you know what, I can do this with my executive authority and I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And I really don't like the idea that California decides to make a change and we automatically follow that. I think that we have the ability in Minnesota to manage ourselves. I think we have the ability to do a lot of things in Minnesota. I don't think we have to have California telling us how to do this. Now, does that mean that we shouldn't be moving forward with clean fuels? Absolutely not. But let's do it in a respectful and a fair way. And when you start talking about we're going to move these new electric vehicles into the state of Minnesota and we're going to have a certain percent of those vehicles that have to be sold within our local dealerships, and if the dealerships don't match those numbers, they cannot sell fossil fuel vehicles. That's what the statute is. That's what's going to happen. So let's take a look at that and realize that we're not ready to move as quickly as what the governor wants to move. It's kind of interesting when you listen to the governor at Farm Fest. He claims to be the big person supporting the ethanol industry and then turns right around and talks about what he wants to do with the California emissions. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done there, and I hope that we can get him to sit down and start talking about this, and we can make something work that's going to fit Minnesota, especially rural Minnesota.
Thank you. I think this will be our final question from the audience.
What is your stance on the abortion issue?
Senator James.
Well, number one, it's quite interesting how this has been moved into the forefront when Minnesota has the Roe versus Wade has absolutely no impact on Minnesota. Minnesota is based on Doe versus Gomez. Doe versus Gomez was put into place, and I believe it was in the late 70s, early 80s, and that was a stronger bill than what Roe versus Wade was, so that's the bill that's been predominant in Minnesota. The Supreme Court has made it very apparent that we could not make changes on the abortion issue legislatively. There was some of that done in the last 10 years, and the Supreme Court struck those down. So the only way abortion is going to change in Minnesota is if the voters do it by a popular vote or if the courts do it. So why are we making this such a big issue in Minnesota? Because the DFL governor and all the other DFLers, they don't want to face the music of what they've done in the last 4 years to the state of Minnesota, the position they've put us in, and so let's keep talking about abortion when whoever gets in is not going to make a change in abortion because you can't do it legislatively right now in the state of Minnesota. So I think we need to move on from that and start talking about the issues that really matter. Inflation, education, and crime. Let's keep those in the forefront where they belong and not hide from them.
Dr. Gall.
I'm going to say I find that a rather disingenuous answer, because why is this such a big deal? Because the Supreme Court decision has now made this another states' rights issue. And so states now have to decide. And we have a gubernatorial candidate who has pledged to sign abortion bans into law if they come to his desk, even in the cases of rape and incest. That's why it's a big deal, because half the population got stripped of their what they thought was a constitutional right this summer. And now we're upset. I will tell you that as a state senator, I will be a fierce advocate to preserve, protect, and defend people's reproductive freedoms in this state. This is a constitutional right that I thought I had, that my daughter thought she had. The day that decision was handed down, she sent me a text, "Mom, I'm crying." I let my daughter down. And so as a state senator, I will work to preserve, protect, and defend the reproductive freedoms we have in this country, because that is a decision nobody should make except a woman and her family. And that is not the state's place to make that decision for them.
Thank you, panelists and candidates. It's now time for closing statements, which will be given in reverse order of your opening statements. Dr. Gall, your 2-minute closing statement, please.
First of all, thank you to SMSU for hosting this event, to my opponent, and to all of you for attending. I always say if you get more than 10 people to come out for a talk, that's a victory right there. Why am I running for the Minnesota State Senate? Like many of you, I am frustrated. I am frustrated by the political partisanship and division. I am frustrated by the inability of our leaders to get things done. Growing up on my family's farm, I was taught not to just complain about things, but to do something about them. I am a person who gets things done, as that message on the digital billboard that is running now by Applebee's proclaims in 5 languages: Spanish, English, Karen, Somali, and Hmong. I get things done for everyone, every constituent in this district. But I don't just talk the talk, I walk the walk. I get things done even though I have a broken ankle and I sit here with a foot in my cast. Okay, so I'm not walking the walk, I'm on a knee scooter, so I'm scooting the scoot, okay? But a broken bone does not stop me. Just over a week ago, I broke my ankle when I was working to earn your vote. I was door knocking in Tracy. But I still show up and do the work that needs to be done. I am also running for the Minnesota Senate because, as I said before, I think I can bridge the divide. I am a connector. I am a farm kid who has lived in the big city and returned to her rural roots. I can bridge the urban-rural divide. For much of my life, I voted Republican, but now I'm a Democrat. I understand the worldview of each party, and I can bridge the divide between them. But again, I don't just talk the talk, I walk the walk. Today, October 13, happens to be my birthday. And what better way to connect than at a birthday party? I hereby cordially invite every single person in this room to join me at Brow Brothers here in Marshall for a delicious dish of birthday ice cream immediately following this forum. I don't care how you vote. I don't care if you're Republican, you're Democrat, you're Green, you're Libertarian. I really don't care. Let's come together and eat ice cream together. I have told Brow Brothers to expect a large crowd, okay? So they're okay. So as a hard worker who gets things done and a person committed to bridging the partisan divide, I ask you to remember my campaign slogan, Anita your vote, on November 8th. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd also like to thank the SMU College here and the students and the Marshall Chamber of Commerce for putting this on. We certainly do appreciate it, and we appreciate the opportunity for everybody to express our views and for you folks to see the differences in the candidates and what we represent and how we proceed to get things done. It has certainly been an honor and a privilege to represent this community for the last 12 years in the Minnesota Senate. It's been a very interesting ride, and I look forward to continuing it. If I'm fortunate enough to be elected between now and November 9th, I would appreciate your vote. It's kind of interesting. When I ran 12 years ago, I ran because I wanted to make sure that Minnesota continued to be a good place for parents to raise their children, have a strong job, be in a strong economy, and want to do their recreation and raise their families in Minnesota. And that's still where my heart is. I want to make sure that Minnesota continues to be a place that can attract new businesses, can attract new employees, and have the training for those employees to meet the jobs that our employers have needs for, want to raise their families, know their families can get a good education, and know that we have a health system that works well. And in most of those cases, we do very well. Some of those others, we don't do so well. We do have a problem. We need to make sure that we get our job workforce, that we work hard to keep that moving forward. And we have to make sure that we provide those things that people want to come so we can keep people in Minnesota, have them come to Minnesota, especially rural Minnesota. And when you get in the Senate, you find out real quick, this is not one Minnesota. Although we would like to all hug each other and say it's one Minnesota and that's the way it isn't that way. And so you need somebody that's willing to stand up and fight for rural Minnesota. And that is very important. When you take a look at the money we get for education versus a metro, the money for roads versus a metro, if you go right down the list, there's a big difference. And I've been there to fight hard for this for the last 10 years, and I can tell you I will fight hard for that for the next term. For as long as I am in the Senate, I will be here to represent rural Minnesota and stand up for the constituents that we have here tonight and will have here in the future. Thank you very much, and I would appreciate your vote.
This concludes our panel for Senate District 15. Our thanks to candidates Dr. Anita Gall and Senator Gary Dames, and media representatives Aaron Ziemer and Mike Lamb. I'm Dr. Maria Kingsbury, and I've been your moderator for our second candidates panel. This program has been sponsored by the SMSU Political Science Association and the Marshall Area Chamber of Commerce. The sponsors wish to thank KMHL Radio, Marshall Studio One, SMSU Media, and the SMSU Faculty Association for their support for this event. From the Conference Center at Southwest Minnesota State University, this has been the 2022 Legislative Candidates Forum. Thank you for joining us, and be sure to vote on Tuesday, November 8th. Have a good evening.